started here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here at the Executive Branch Efficiency Task Force meeting. This is meeting number 5, and we appreciate all the work that you've put into your presentation that we're going to see and all of that before us. Before we get going, we need approval of the minutes from September 26th. Oh, sorry, roll call. We need roll call first, and then we'll do the minutes.
Senator Nemus,
Present.
Senator Westerfield, Senator Yates,
Present.
Representative Baker,
Present.
Representative McCool, Representative Minter, Representative Miller,
Here.
Senator Mills.
I'm here. Now we'll look at the minutes and have approval of the minutes from September 26th. Is there a motion? A motion from Senator Nemus, second from Representative Miller. All in favor say aye. Aye. The minutes are approved. One of the things we do before we start is to read our charge of this task force before we get started every meeting. So let me read this into the record. The task force was developed to take a wide but deep look into the functions of the executive branch of the Commonwealth. Specifically, the hope is that we will be able to go cabinet by cabinet, allow them to come in and explain their structure from the top down and how they function. This will lead to further conversations on how each cabinet is funded and their budget building practices. Additionally, these meetings will give the cabinet the opportunity to propose to the legislature future reorganization plans and any other proposals aimed at increasing efficiency that requires legislative action. Overall, this task force should produce information helpful to the General Assembly in increasing government efficiency in the 2023 session and sessions to come. So today we have before us the Transportation Cabinet, and we have all kinds of dignitaries before us, and I will allow Secretary Gray to introduce the folks that are here. And just remember, Mr. Secretary, every time you mention the I-69 bridge, you get extra credit. So,
All right, Mr. Chairman, here we go. I-69, I-69, I-69. Okay. Well, I will say, just as a parenthetically before we get going, you all have done the communities that have come together over that project and the unity that's represented there is really remarkable. That's what I've observed in the short time. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you all very much for asking us to join you today. And what I want to do is, first things first, let me introduce some of the folks in the room, or all of the folks that are from the cabinet side. And I will say that they wanted to come here today, didn't they? Did you hear those laughs? They really wanted to be here. Well, the truth is, seriously, because they are proud of their work, and you all can understand that, because they're proud of their work, and then they really did want to join here today, and they have all contributed to this presentation today and would be available. I've often say that I'm not a know-it-all and didn't have to be the smartest kid in the class, so if we can't answer a question that you've got, we have resources to help. Okay, so of course, many of you know Kenny Bishop to my left, who is our legislative director, because you all deal with him a lot. And of course, to my right is former secretary and today deputy secretary Mike Hancock. James Ballinger is right behind Mike. And I often say about James that, he has out of the 4,100 and change employees in the cabinet, in the Department of Highways are a little over 3,600 of those employees. We'll come to that more, but that represents big shoulders to carry. And right beside James is Ron Rigney, who is our Division of Program Management in the Department of Highways director. Bobby Jo Lewis, many of you also know Bobby Jo from her work in the Department of Rural and Municipal Aid as commissioner. Vicki Bourne is director of the Office of Transportation Delivery. Matt Cole is commissioner of the Department of Vehicle Regulation, which involves today the Real ID and licensing activities. Heather Stout is director of the Office of Information Technology. That's our IT functions, which is a very big part of the cabinet's activities as well. Brad Schwant is deputy commissioner of the Department of Aviation. Pat Grugan is director of the Office of Support Services. Sarah Jackson is not only the Real ID project manager, but she often carries many hats and wears them as the senior advisor in the cabinet. And Brad Webb is administrative branch manager of the Office of Human Resources. So, as I said, we have the resources here to help when we get in the need of help. I wanted to go through first. Let me give you a picture of our presentation, which I'm thinking will take probably maybe in a rehearsal it went about 20 or 25 minutes, because I do have 26 slides, and you all said that's okay, but it does represent what the questions that you all are asking and the interest that you have, the comments. So out of the gate, I want to talk a little bit about what in my view are the extraordinary results that the cabinet has achieved. Some of the very unusual activities, not the always expected ones, that just roads and bridges and maintenance. And then I want to talk a little bit about some examples of efficiencies that have been initiated. And then I'll go through the slides. So, as you might imagine, not everything about the Transportation Cabinet fits neatly in a PowerPoint. In fact, some of the most important work we do these days probably was not originally even imagined or envisioned for our cabinet. In the 2.5 years that I've been in this role, I've discovered that the Transportation Cabinet is really a logistics and operations backbone. Think of it this way, of course, that we've got maintenance facilities in every county in the state. So when the need arises for that operational support, whatever it might be, whether it's road clearing as a function of an emergency and a disaster, or other activities, the Transportation Cabinet, and especially the Department of Highways, is there. And I want to refer especially to some of our recent weather disasters, the tornadoes in western Kentucky last December's, and the flooding in eastern Kentucky this past July. These are just some images from the most recent flooding activities. We've reported on these activities to the transportation committees of the interim transportation committees. Every department, office, and highway district has actually been involved. All 12 highway districts have been involved in some way in these responses to these disasters. We've had the mission of repairing and reopening hundreds of roadways and bridges, and we're currently also responsible for the debris cleanup, again, outside of what would be a conventional or normal scope of activities. But because of the competence and the commitment of leadership, and I'm not talking about us sitting up here at the table, but the folks behind everyone that's here today, that's how come we're able to do these extraordinary jobs. Our crews have even hauled water and food and cleaning supplies, cots, portable buildings, heavy equipment, you name it. When I was coming back from, actually, Kenny, I believe you were with me that day. We were coming back from some of the most impacted counties, and we were on the Mountain Parkway, and a convoy of equipment was headed. This was 3 days after the flood, and these convoys were coming from other districts. We've also hauled and delivered and installed hundreds of travel trailers, again, outside of normal scope, for use as temporary shelter for Kentuckians who lost their homes. I'll add that several of our employees lost their own homes in both of these disasters, yet were back at work almost immediately. We've also dealt with an unusual streak of severe and damaging snow and ice storms, while at the same time working around COVID protocols and a shortage of contract plow operators. On top of the weather disasters, we had the emergency closure of the Brent Spence Bridge in northern Kentucky following the fire on the bridge in November of 2020. It was another all-hands-on-deck emergency, but the bridge was safely reopened just 41 days later, ahead of schedule and actually under budget. Another extraordinary effort took place on the programmatic side, the launching of an entirely new driver licensing system, which you'll hear more about a little bit later. But it was, I think, an extraordinary accomplishment to create a DMV-style system for the first time in Kentucky, a system that greatly enhances the security of identity documents while building into the system customer conveniences Kentuckians have not seen before. Conveniences like online renewal of driver's licenses and IDs, appointment scheduling, and even the ability to go to any regional driver licensing office of your choice. As I said, there'll be more about that later in the presentation. So now, second topic I wanted to cover was just some examples that we developed of efficiency and adaptability. In my own experience, I have to lean on, in the private sector, previous an earlier career, I guess, I was fortunate to be able to do projects with Toyota. And Toyota has what's known as the Toyota Production System. And one of the features of the Toyota Production System is not just Kaizen and continuous improvement, but also continuous cost basis reduction. And that's been one of the things that I've really observed with the cabinet is there is a conscious effort always, and I think that's a function of we are a contracting agency. There's always an attention to costs and controlling those costs. We are continually modernizing business practices for efficiency and public convenience. As an example, a consultant portal was developed within our Division of Professional Services in the Department of Highways to replace a paper-based procurement process. That's a single system for initializing, advertising, submitting, scoping, estimating, negotiating, approving, and finalizing professional service contracts, of which, as you can imagine, with an annual budget of $3.7 billion and a big highway budget within that there are a lot of professional services contracts. So making that application process efficient is a big deal. It used to take several months, 9 months on average, to get from initial advertising to a project startup. Now it's 100 days on most contracts, or 3 months. Consultants can focus on engineering services today rather than administrative tasks that end up being charged to overhead. They can quickly submit their annual pre-qualifications electronically rather than having to hand carry hard copies or paper copy binders to Frankfurt. Approvals now take days and not months. There's also a portal by which commercial vehicle drivers can submit much of their paperwork for CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, of course. Okay, now I want to go into the slides. I want to start with some slides that will describe the vision and the mission of the cabinet. The vision is something that is an element of our strategic plan that has actually elevated itself in the last couple of years, and that vision is that we are striving to be national leaders in transportation, who provide transportation infrastructure and services for the 21st century, delivering new economic opportunities for all Kentuckians. We really do tie, and I've noticed this, it's not something that was created certainly by me. The governor has been really attentive to this connection between what we do and the economy. And of course, you all know that because you're right, you're boots on the ground, you're talking to your constituents, you know how vital the transportation system is, of course, to your districts. So the mission hasn't really changed. This mission statement was created some time ago, may have been tweaked over time, but it's very clear that the mission of the cabinet is to provide a safe, efficient, environmentally sound, and fiscally responsible transportation system that delivers economic opportunity and enhances the quality of life in Kentucky. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Kenny. The functional responsibilities of the cabinet include improving highway safety, of course, number one, We're emphasizing both highway safety for the public and employee safety for our employees, with the notion that if we get our arms around and we can create a safe working environment for our own people, then there is a higher likelihood that we will also create a safer environment for the public, the traveling public. Our functional responsibilities also include maintaining and upgrading highways and bridges, administering the rural and municipal aid programs. That's Bobby Joe's shop as Commissioner of Rural and Municipal Aid. Vehicle regulation, driver's licensing, motor carriers. We coordinate in transit funding with local agencies, aviation funding with Kentucky's airports, waterway and ferry boat funding, and we coordinate railroad funding. Believe it or not, this is an abbreviated org chart, and the typeface is pretty small. I've got one that's not abbreviated, and it illustrates all the activities of the cabinet. But as I said, think of it this way: that I'll have the exact numbers here in just a minute on a slide. But out of the 4,100 and a little more than 4,100 employees in the cabinet today, 3,600 of those, and a few more, 3,600, but roughly 3,600 are in the Department of Highways. Department of Highways is shown here. Where is it?
Right under the Department of Aviation.
Right under the Department of, over on the right, Office of Project Man. Oh, Department of Highways, absolutely right. It's different than my org chart that I'm used to seeing, y'all, so forgive me. But again, the Department of Highways is one that influences almost every other activity in one way or another. But these other departments are really mission critical, and I'm sure you all interact with many of them yourselves. This slide illustrates the decline in full-time personnel in the cabinet since 2012. I don't know whether it's apocryphal or imaginary or not, but I've heard stories from former Secretary Jimmy Codell, who says that Mike, that at one point in time, maybe when Cal Grayson was Commissioner of Highways and then the first Secretary of Transportation, but there were as many as 12,000 employees in the cabinet. Today there are 4,120. In 2012, so 10 years ago, the employment level was 4,645. Now, let me talk a little bit about that. Yes, it's been on a declining trend for many years now. The cabinet had, as I said, these numbers from a decade ago. Today, we're at 4,120. That's a decline of 11%. We currently have 300 job postings. Not a surprise to any of you all that represents a real challenge in today's marketplace. There are stress fractures in those numbers. Looking at it from a lens or perhaps ahead of being in business for a career or two, you all know, and I certainly have that experience of the anxiety that can occur when you don't have muscle and strength and sufficient employees, often or sometimes, to get the job done. We believe that, frankly, that there is some anxiety associated with the new pension system, the tiered pension system, because it has compromised the recruiting and retention of employees. And so too are the salaries that we're able to offer. Now, we all recognize that there's been a big effort. Certainly the governor right there in front and the legislature right there in front to support employees and to try to adjust to inflationary times. So that is certainly appreciated. But nevertheless, despite that, compared to the private sector, we're still behind. And that's both professional and our front line. As a result, there's been an upward trend of outsourcing, contracting out, particularly in the areas of bridge inspections, design services, construction inspection services, and bridge load raters, the folks who calculate the safe load carrying capacity of bridges. On that point, I would like to, again, get an opportunity to praise the employees of the cabinet. I want to point out that in the wake of the recent flooding in eastern Kentucky, our bridge inspectors and experts, with the help of consultants, over a 2-week period, inspected 1,098 state and county-owned bridges in the flood-impacted counties. 1,098 in a 2-week period. And out of that 1,098, we had almost 200 that were in need of significant repair or full replacement. And we're on a path for those that need full replacement. We've already let contracts a little over 30, and we have contracts ready to go on another 30 before the end of the year. That means we've designed, we've engineered, and we've put estimates together for these projects. So not a casual undertaking is my point. Even in ordinary times, I want to mention this too, the Department of Highways has the responsibility for inspecting more than 14,000 state and county-owned bridges each year, and for actively maintaining more than 9,000 state-owned bridges. So the point is, you can't outsource everything. Project management has to come from the cabinet, within the cabinet. Engineering leadership, engineering direction has to come from the cabinet, from the employees of the cabinet. And this is one of the concerns that I have, because when we think about efficiency, you know, the first inclination is to think, how do you reduce cost? But an equally important, and this is something I have to confess that I've spent a lot of time working with the Toyota production system. And there's an awareness there that, you know, if you don't have the muscle and if you don't have the strength, then you can't be efficient. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, Kenny. All right, I'm going to take you all now through employment by each division. I mentioned earlier that we have a total of 4,120 employees today. Now, that does not include contract employees, and that's a number of about 80 in our IT functions. But general administration, 222, vehicle regulation, I'm not going to go through all those. But you see, highways is a big number. Vehicle regulation, big number. Public facing, Senator.
Secretary, we have a question. I meant to mention this before.
Okay.
I may pause for questions here, just real quick. That's Senator Westfield has a
I
question.
should have said that if you need to, y'all just raise your hand. I was going to say we've got room for questions, of course, at the end.
Don't give me that sort of invitation now.
Okay, all right.
I texted John Snyder and I said, because I got booted off the transportation committee 7 years ago by accident, and despite my protests, have never been put back on. So I've got 7 years of questions for these.
Oh my
folks I got.
goodness! All right, okie doke. We'll do our best.
That's all I can ask. You said there's 4,120, but you mentioned contract, and I know you mentioned that earlier, and there's outsourcing and things. Is it just IT, or where do you all have other contract staff?
In vehicle regulation, our standing up quickly the Real ID offices meant that we needed to get contract employees,
Okay.
secure contract employees.
But they're just doing administrative.
No, these are actually public-facing roles.
Right, but they're not. That's what I thought of. That's what I was thinking of when I think administrative, not leadership administrative.
Oh, right.
Clerical maybe is the better word.
Customer service.
Right.
Customer service, yeah. There we
Are
go.
those then the only places where you've currently got contract staff?
Yeah, we got professional services there.
Oh, yeah. Professional services, of course, is contracted out. That's consulting engineers. Legal has some requirements
Really?
for hiring attorneys to represent the cabinet.
Outside of the cabinet's
Outside of
employ-
the cabinet staff,
Is that-
because the cabinet staff is really modest in
Is it because it's a specialized sort of
Yes.
litigation? Okay.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've got some IT questions at the end, as I typically do, but I'll wait. But thank you.
and we've got Heather here.
All right.
Okay, proceed. Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. Next, let's slide, Kenny. The overall KYTC, but basically these slides, by the way, y'all are arranged in, the title of the title at the top, then programmatic on the left, and then budget information on the right. I'm going to go down to the total funding. You see that we've got number of employees, and that's 4120. Above that, total funding. This is all of our revenue sources together, federal and state restricted and general fund is $3.769 billion. And that includes general administration and support, Department of Highways, aviation, rural and municipal aid. I'm going to go through those. Let's go to the next slide. So general administration and support includes 222 employees. That includes IT, for example. So you need to add contract employees, which is roughly 80 on top of that. That's arguably our largest, our highest content of, except for Real ID today. What we're doing with Real ID is we've had the contract employees temporary services through temporary services because we couldn't hire quickly enough to stand up these offices. Now we are in the process of hiring on a full-time basis. Okay. Let's back up that one more time. No. Yeah, that's right. So now this 171 also includes the funding for electric vehicles. And that's roughly an $87 million number. Is that right, Mike? Or 81?
I think it was actually 81 was from general admin, 18 was for the EV charging stations.
So together that's 81. Is that
so
right? Yeah.
81 for general admin.
Oh, 81 million is the general administration. But on top of that, the difference between the 81 million and 171 is the EV funding that was provided by the General Assembly in the last budget. Okay, next one. Department of Highways, earlier, said it, punctuated it before. 3,628 employees total, all across the state. And the total funding for the Department of Highways is $2.796 billion. This is coming from the road fund, state restricted, and federal. So our federal portion there is in the blue, the dark blue. So that's our federal matching funds, Federal Highway Administration. That's the annual funding that we get. Now that number is up now through the bipartisan infrastructure law. That 1.391 million is roughly 230 million more than it was last year as a result of the infrastructure legislation. Sir?
It'll return back down to that lower number in.
Well, it's a 5-year commitment. So, and according to those who are authorities like Mike and Ron, it's never actually, or in y'all's career, it's never gone back down, has it?
They've always found a way to keep it.
They've always found a way to keep it
Okay.
at that number. And with,
That's good news.
yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah, knock on wood, right. Okay.
250 million.
Oh, the 250, thanks, Mike. The 250 million is the commitment that the General Assembly made at the encouragement of the governor in the last session for the mega projects. So that number is in there as well. So that takes it up pretty significantly from the last biennium. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Is there any other questions on that one? Okay. Representative McCool.
Representative McCool has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, thank you for your presentation. Just quickly, with the federal dollars coming in, that's the matching. Do we have to equalize that match? And are we still, prior to that, we was short quite a bit for the road fund? Is that correct? Did I read the strategic plan for Kentucky? That I read somewhere that's $895 million short.
I think
On a
that was
yearly
on
basis.
maintenance. Is that right? I think that was a backlog of maintenance projects estimated, where we really needed more funding. Is that
Yeah, okay.
Representative,
with
what you're
this,
asking?
Can you use the federal dollars and these others to take care of that shortfall or not? Because I don't think your salary savings is going to cover that. That's from less people, for sure.
can we use the federal dollars to take care of that? Well, the
Yeah.
federal dollars help us annually on a number of projects. But typically we're using state dollars for maintenance projects.
So,
Right.
if I could, Mr. Chair,
Sure.
so if I just clearly understand, are we now level or are we still short financially?
Well, if you ask the professionals who keep their lens on this all the time, we're still short on our pent up maintenance costs. We're still short on what that number. If we were fixing all of the needs that we have, then we still need more funding.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Proceed.
Okay, proceed. Senator Westerfield, is that okay? All right.
Yeah, we're caught up.
Okay. Rural and municipal aid, big number here too, of course. A small number of employees. So the administrative costs for this distribution of $372 million in this budget is really limited, very small. This is Bobby Joe Lewis's shop, and I imagine that some of you all. She deals with a lot of county judges and a lot of mayors across the state. And by the way, it's important to mention this too, because you all hear about the secretary's discretionary account sometimes. There's not a lot of discretion to it. There is a good, very bona fide process of evaluating the projects that are requested of the secretary's discretionary account. That a number used to be $25 million a year. $25 million. It's now $10 million a year is what we're working with. And this is where the county's asking us for funds for repairs on roads routinely. And we're coming up, we really are coming up short. We've got a backlog of 30-some million there. And we've got 10 million a year in the current budget. Now folks know about that. I wouldn't be doing my job, and Bobby Joe would put a hook on me if I didn't tell you all that, if I didn't share that.
But that's
Senator-
that's administered through this Department of Rural and Municipal
Yes,
Aid.
it is. It is administered. That 10 million a year is administered. It's fascinating because it's sort of like stoplights, signals. I didn't realize how many requests there would be for signalized intersections before I got this job, and I didn't realize how many requests there'd be for that $10 million. It's a routine. It's routinely requested from that bucket. Okay. This next one is the Department of Vehicle Regulation. This is Matt Cole's shop. Sarah Jackson is real involved in this as well. It's where we have the Division of Motor Vehicle Licensing, motor carriers, driver's licensing, customer service, and also is housed the Kentucky Motor Vehicle Commission. All right, number of employees there is, I think, 219. Matt, does that include the contract? And what's that number today? 150. So contract employees are on, the contract employees, the temporary agency employees that are in the Real ID and licensing offices, they're on top of this 219. Just remember that we've stood up 32 offices across the state in that Real ID program. Okay. Aviation, It's total funding of 36,456,000, and that includes a one-time funding that the legislature approved of it's 18 million, isn't it? I believe. Does anybody know? 11, right. 11 million. Yep. So this is not a normalized number. And that includes the Capital City Airport Division, the Commonwealth Aviation Division, and the Kentucky Airport Zoning Commission. Any questions on that? You know how many municipal airports we got around?
So normally the general fund contribution is only about $500,000 a year on aviation. I noticed it says 11.4.
That's about right.
Is that about right?
I think so, Senator.
Okay.
It's a Brad. Okay, Brad Swant is the deputy commissioner.
So we normally contribute about $500,000 a year out of general fund.
Yes, and
Do you
that's to
guys-
pay back previous bonds from over 10 years.
Okay, so those are that's obligated.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the next one. There are 24 employees in that department. Public transportation, Senator.
Senator Westerfield.
Thank you,
I'm
Chairman. You don't have to answer this right now. Is there a helpful way or a resource that points to what in each one of these different departments, what the restricted funds are, what permissible uses there are for the restricted funds? To be honest, I have no idea. So when I see state restricted,
Yes. The answer is, go ahead, Mike.
I don't know what each one's restricted to.
I'm going to let Mike
Or
handle
from.
that one.
Yes, the restricted funds are categorized, and we do have a sheet that shows that. Our budget office can provide that, and we're certainly glad to.
Thank you.
But do the restricted funds generally are bond obligations, borrowed money in the past? Is that not really?
It can go into a lot of different areas. Restricted funds are funds that are generated from source A to be used for a designated source or a designated use, and it can be a number of things. Let me see if I can just pull some examples of restricted funds. I mean, we've had them used in the past for sales tax from aviation jet fuel. We've had funds for purchases for highway equipment. I mean, these are just some examples, various fees and investment income that have a designated place in the budget to be used. So they're otherwise restricted from other use.
Okay. Thank you.
But we can provide that. Okay. All right. Okay. Do we already talk about public transportation? Oh, okay. Again, on the left, the programmatic, multimodal planning, public transportation, human service transportation. 15 employees in this department. Total funding, $98 million a year. And there's another. They also administer another roughly, it's over $100 million of federal funds that are not passed through in our funding or our budget. And those are, remind me. Thanks, Vicki. Non-emergency Medicaid. And how much is that number? 150. I was wrong. It's more than just a little over 100 million. Okay. I'm going to let Mike handle this one.
Well,
He knows it well because he did those Louisville bridges and he knows it real well.
Well, this particular slide is a little bit different from the ones we've been looking at previously because it has two separate items on the sheet. One of those is debt service, and the debt service is the amount that the cabinet pays for past bonds sold through the Kentucky Turnpike Authority, and we've used bonds over the last 10, 15 years, actually since 1984, the cabinet has used about $4.1 billion worth of Turnpike Authority and federal Garvey bonds, that type of thing. But for fiscal year 2023, we have debt service in the amount of $135 million plus or minus that'll cover us for those past debts that we are servicing. For our capital budget, this is a little bit different. Our capital plan is funded through the transportation budget, and in that capital plan, we have about $35 million, a little bit less than that, to take care of basically our physical infrastructure across the state that the cabinet owns. We have approximately 1,500 buildings across the Commonwealth of Kentucky that are maintained by the transportation cabinet, and so the vast majority of this money would go to help maintain and keep those facilities running. So about $35 million for fiscal year 23 through our capital budget.
What's the maintenance backlog on those 1,500
Oh
buildings?
my goodness.
Just
a good one.
approximate, just curious.
We've probably got about 100 work orders pending, different things we need done at all the buildings,
Cost?
Cost,
probably a couple $1 million.
really?
At least. I mean, there are a lot of things though.
You said it was a couple $1 million?
He said a couple million, but I think those are minor repairs.
Right.
And we've got, as all of you know, I'm sure, out in your districts, you've got county maintenance facilities, you've got sheds, you've got other pieces of infrastructure that need repair, need replacing.
Yeah.
And so if we did a big picture, long-term, what do we need in this area? The $35 million a year keeps us rolling,
Yeah,
but
it'd be substantial.
it's substantial. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, the next few slides are, I'm sorry, the next few slides have to do with are addressing the budget and fund. So we're going to talk the budget for fiscal year 2023, fund sources, state road funds, federal funds, state restricted funds, and state general funds. The primary funding partners, we're using the language, basically the sources, is the General Assembly, U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highways, Federal Transit Administration, Federal Aviation Administration, and Federal Rail Administration. Now, those are, the order of magnitude, of course, is the top two, and then it declines. But still, Federal Transit Administration is a pretty big number too. State Road Fund, total revenue. You all see the breakdown there, where the funds are coming from, but the total revenue for 23 is $1.721 million. And 48% of it, you can see, is in the yellow. The motor fuels gas tax, $833.8 million. 35% is coming from the motor vehicle usage tax receipts, translates sales tax. 6.9% or $119 million is from vehicle license receipts. Motor vehicle operators receipts, $27.1 million or 1.6%. Weight distance tax receipts, $94.6 million. And other revenue, $42.7. Okay? So that's the state side. No. Okay. Uses of the state road fund, revenue sharing with cities and counties, going back to the rural and municipal aid, there was over $350 million. Routine road and bridge maintenance, somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 million. Annual resurfacing program, state construction program. This year, as we're estimating it, letting the contracts that will be let will be somewhere between $1 billion and $1.2 billion. Now, those letting, that doesn't mean we've got the expenses all in that year, of course. Debt service, highway planning, vehicle regulation, general administration, capital projects, aviation, Kentucky State Police. Now, that state police number, as you all probably know, has declined some. It was north of 100 million, and what is it now? What is it? What are we carrying? About? Is anybody? We are absent one of our principal people,
Yeah.
and that's Robin Brewer, who is our director. That's right. Well, she had a conflict she just couldn't escape today, or she would have been here. Yeah, she has these numbers right off the top of her head. Okay, let's go to the next one. The federal fund sources are shown here. The total revenues, $1.548 billion. Big number in that is, of course, the federal highway funding formula, the formula funding.
Representative Miller has a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned EV before. Could you go a little deeper into EV, not in completely in terms of only on the capital side, but on an ongoing basis? I know we're creating a bunch of charging stations, but talk about the economics going forward. Are there fees that you got to put a credit card in to charge up your Tesla, or and is the shortfall going to be met by federal funds, state funds? If you could just talk about the economics of that whole.
I think some of that, Mr. Chairman, some of that's still in development. You know, it's not all resolved yet. But there will be, in terms of revenues, there will be charges for the charges at the stations, and you know, what's the mix going to be? We need Justin Harrod here right now, or John Moore, don't we? I'm going to have to get back to you on some of that. Okay. You probably know that we're looking at somewhere around 70 stations in the first round, and that would be on our interstates and our parkways in the first round.
Mr. Chairman,
Is it 70?
just I won't be here to monitor it, but nonetheless, I hope that there is some equality between how much taxes I'm paying for per mile of an EV as for a gasoline fueled car, because that's clearly going to grow. And
I say routinely,
very interested in that topic. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I say routinely that I'm driving an electric vehicle today, have for 2 years, and I shouldn't be getting away with that.
I know.
You're right. Okay, Mike,
If you don't
go
mind.
ahead. Yeah.
If I could add just a little bit, there's so much in the EV world right now that is evolving, and so much is. I mean, Kentucky was just approved. Our plan was approved for the future, so we're working with federal entities to try to put all that together and to nail down exactly what that's going to look like going forward. But you're absolutely right. The idea is that those who drive an EV will not be penalized, but rather they will pay whatever fair share ultimately comes. And
Perfect.
that's the
Yeah,
hope.
fair share is what we're looking for.
And by the way, late breaking news from Kenny. Our plan will be presented to the A&R committee. When?
Next week.
Next week. So if anybody wants to listen in on that, that'd be a great time. They have really done, as Mike said, they've done a great job, I think. We were one of the first plans to get developed and presented to the federal agencies.
I have one other comment too on that. In general, I'm hopeful. I'm concerned about what Representative Miller just talked about, but probably my biggest concern with electric vehicles is even more global than that. It's, how does the petroleum marketers, the C stores, the gas stations, how do they fit in this? Are we, is the government actually taking over part of that economy? So I'm hopeful that when y'all develop these plans that y'all have been talking with the petroleum marketers and how to partner in the future and what the future is going to look like. Can y'all comment on that just briefly?
what the future's going to look like of the economy associated with the gasoline and how that's
well,
going to.
the business model of
Oh.
charging stations at what is our gas station. For example, the big Buc-ee's, what's
Yeah,
Buc-ee's
right.
going to look like in 10, 20 years from now?
I think that's a really good, really good visionary question.
Yeah, it is. A good
And
question.
and as Mike said earlier, that you've got to. There are about as many ideas as there are vendors right now.
Yep.
Concepts.
I apologize for the interruption. Y'all can continue.
So the federal fund uses, I won't. Mike already mentioned about the bonds. Of course, that's there, but interstate and maintenance, surface transportation program, roads and bridges. The federal funds go a long ways. They're matching on our federalized projects, as many of you all know, of course, they're matching us. If we're putting up 20%, the federal funding are roughly 80%. Anything I miss on that? We're good. Okay. Our restricted fund, the sources for fiscal 23 are shown here. That jet tax, the jet fuel sales tax, that number is including the 11 million, isn't it? I believe. Yeah. Is including that 11 million, that one-time appropriation. Okay. Restricted fund uses are shown here. I won't tick them all off. All right. The sources for general fund support. If you go down to the bottom, that's the big number that legislature and the governor agreed on, which is really, really, really going to be important. And it includes that 11.4 million that we talked about for the support for public airports.
Senator Westerfield.
Are the percentages? What are the percentages? You got 8.5 next to the big one, and
something's wrong
8.5
there.
next to the airports.
Well, you caught it. Yeah, we looked at them 100 times and we missed that one. That's a good lens. No, it's more than. Obviously, it's more than out of 295 million. We got 250 million. That's what, 70%, 80. Okay,
I mean,
we'll fix it.
It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 if the non-public school transportation figure percentage is right. Anyway,
I think your decimal point needs to be moved over.
80. There we go. 85%. See, it's the reason y'all are on this committee.
and yet still not on transportation anymore. Daggone.
All right. Thank y'all. Good editors here. All right. State and federal report. This is one of your questions too. What are our reporting protocols, or what are our reporting requirements? As you can see, and this is arguably a really important slide. We long list here of reporting requirements. A long list. The Federal Highways Administration has a really vigorous reporting requirements. This is all in addition to our internal audit function. So, in addition to the reporting that is that's required here and illustrated here, we have the internal audit feature. or function.
And the state auditor.
And the state auditor, once a year, audits the auditor of public accounts does a financial audit of the cabinet annually. Any questions on that one? We think that one's a pretty important slide. We're glad you asked that question. I'll put it that way. Back on I had some notes here that I failed to, when we were talking about KSP is budgeted to receive $118.6 million from the road fund in this biennium, or $59.4 million in the current fiscal year and $59.2 million in fiscal 2024. And I think that's about half of what that's about half of what it was. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, here we are. Sarah Jackson's world and Matt Cole's world. There's a lot of text on this, but they have done so much. I've really, we're all proud of what they've accomplished. And in the fall of 2019, the first driver licensing regional office was opened. 120 clerks transferred the driver's licensing issuance function to our regional offices March of 2020 to June of 2022. Opened 32 regional offices. The original idea was 17. 350 employees, including our temporary staff, serving 5,000 to 6,000 Kentuckians daily. This next bullet point is an important one as well. Online renewals began in June of 2021 with over 240,000 engaged. So 240,000 have been served through online renewals. Mail-in renewals began October of 2021 with 25,000 served. We had pop-up eligible counties of 94 pop-up eligible counties, serving nearly 5,300 Kentuckians the first 9 months of 2022, 170 plus pop-up events. This next one's an important one too. Both tornado and both the West Kentucky tornado, we responded with establishing a location within a week and transitioned into a permanent location in Western Kentucky after the tornado. Pop-up units were making daily visits to state parks in some of the hardest hit areas. In Eastern Kentucky, I witnessed myself in the first couple of days at the Sportsplex in Knott County, where we stood up an office, a pop-up office, and there was a line of people that needed credentials. The very first day, and that's continued. 3,300 plus credentials have been issued to flood victims, and it's nearly a 1 month pop-up presence has occurred in Eastern Kentucky since the flood. Here are the 32 regional offices spread across the state. Now, there's always going to be, a case where someone's, going to have experienced a problem. And oh my goodness, I got a real letter the other day from an 80-year-old lady she said, I'm 8, and she said she'd had a really tough experience because she didn't have the credentials that were required. And we want to say it's not our requirements. It's the federal requirements. But it's a tough conversation. As of October 24th, 2022, percentage of Kentuckians choosing Real ID over standard credentials. 27% the week of Sarah, help me with this. I didn't look closely at this one.
27% of the issuance for that week were
Okay.
23% year to date, and then statewide were 16%, while the nation is around 51%.
Did y'all hear that, Senator You did? Okay. You want to redo it? What Matt just said?
Yes, if you don't mind repeating
Matt,
that
why
again.
don't you come up here?
Because we got some folks maybe listening or may listen. And we got a couple questions too. So
Absolutely, no
thanks,
problem.
Matt.
Yeah, for the Real ID issuance, the 27% of people issued in week of October 9th were Real IDs.
Okay.
23% year to date have been Real IDs at a total number issued. And then overall, what we've issued to the entire state, we're 16% adoptance rate. Now, the national rate is hovering right around 51 or 52%. These are the numbers that we get from TSA and DHS. And the difference is the way that we're built with kind of a rural-urban composition that we are, we're probably going to fall between 35 and 45% adoptance rate. The reason why the national gets higher is some states are a mandatory Real ID state. So like Georgia is at 99.9 right now. So those pull the overall nation numbers higher, but we're tracking exactly where we're supposed to be at this point. We think we'll see long-term growth with younger drivers. When they tend to come with all their documents, they tend to adopt them at a higher level than older generations.
Representative Miller has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're talking about convenience and time to get your driver's license. I know at one point we had a problem with CDLs, big backlog getting people getting their CDL, and then just driver testing for new drivers. Can you all comment on what the current backlogs are, if some in both from a new driver getting a driver's test as well as a CDL?
Absolutely. Not to speak for the Kentucky State Police, but they handle all of the driver testing portion, both written and road.
But the guy behind you, I think they report to him. So
the big success that they had was on July 6th. They opened up all of their testing locations to match our regional office model, which means you can go to any place. So early on, because of their staffing being as low as it was, they really had to control the flow of population to certain locations to keep the little locations from being overrun from the bigger ones. So now that they're at that point, testing's in much better shape. We were in a tough spot when we went into the pandemic, and that just kind of made it worse. They've doubled their efforts. They're looking to have partners come in with some electronic options. We're already starting to do testing they're starting to do testing on iPads that'll automatically upload to the driving record. So we're learning ways to streamline that process, and we certainly made CDL drivers a priority there. For a while, when that backlog for credentials, we made a CDL only line, so that way when they came, they would go essentially to the fast pass, and they would go straight to the front of the line. So we're in much better shape now with CDLs than where we were. Obviously, we need about 46,000 more CDL drivers nationwide. So we're ready for them. They just need to come see us. We'll be glad to take care of them.
okay, all right, thank you.
Senator Westfield.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to say for the record what I've said before. Our bifurcated set of IDs, which was a compromise thing after some nonsense politics, is going to backfire royally. It's the first time I've seen statistics on this, and you mark it down. We're going to have constituents who are going to want to travel or go somewhere, and they won't be able to do what they thought they were going to be able to do because it's a confusing bifurcated option here. And that's not your fault. I'm not fussing at y'all.
Understood.
It was the legislature did that, and it was stupid for us to do. So people are going to. My question is this, or my request is this: I'd like you all, to the extent that you think you can, find ways or think of ways to track or identify how many people run into that problem. Now that may not be something you can track.
We may be
But
able to
there's
work
going to
with
be
TSA on that.
there's going to come a time when I assume, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's going to come a time when the legislature is going to be asked to get rid of the old.
standard.
Yep. And it'd be nice to have data to show just how often it's a pain in the neck, because I know exactly who's going to get the phone calls when a constituent's at the airport and can't get through the security line.
Right. One thing that may help you is we've already started the process of having an active campaign that's going to start in November and will run through the enforcement date of May 3rd. So there's going to be television commercials, radio spots, Facebook ads. We're doing everything we can to get
Are
the
other
word
states
out.
doing that
because
too?
Yes, yes. And we're also
Non-mandatory.
we're coordinating our efforts with TSA, who's also getting ready to launch a very big promotion on it as well. The airlines are adding the questions to people's the software. So when
Yeah.
they book the
I've
flight,
noticed that.
do you have a real ID? So they've started an industry, and that's the biggest thing. Is I still get a lot of calls from people who are mad because I'm making them get a real ID, and I tell them I'm not doing that, and they're like, I don't go anywhere and I don't do anything. Why are you making me do this? And I said, it's not. It's a voluntary thing. Our biggest thing is we just want to make sure that everybody's knowledgeable to why you need a real ID.
Yeah.
So when May 3rd of next year comes around, and somebody wants to get on a commercial domestic flight, they want to enter a restricted federal building, if they want to go to military bases, we just want to make sure they have the right credential, and we're prepared to issue that to them. But right now, we have to make sure that we share that knowledge with your constituents to make sure that they can make the right decision. Another misconception is that their standard license is invalidated on May 3rd, and that's just simply not true. Their license is still good for age-related purchases, voting, whatever they needed to do, with the exception of those 3 items. But if they do need to get that, we want them to come see us.
I want to commend you before I yield the mic again that I haven't gotten quite as many complaints out of the Christian County office. And Sarah, I want to tell both of you and Matt that I appreciate your efforts to improve the operation. And I know that's not the only place where things have been bubbling up, but it's hard to stand up all those offices around the state, but I'm thankful for the work that's been put into it. Thank you, Chairman.
Just a couple questions for me, and go ahead.
Senator,
Go ahead.
no, I just, Matt,
We should have got a bench.
I just, I'm not going to take long, but I do want to remind you all, because I'm reminded every day of this, that this switch to a regional issuance model hasn't only represented a sea change for your constituents and for all of us, but it's been one of the most significant business process changes ever presented to a state government front-facing agency. It's huge. So it is no wonder you're hearing from constituents, and we are working very, very hard. It is still evolving. We have lots of questions to ask, and we're still studying everything relative to the program. So we're at that phase now where there are 32 offices up, twice as many as were originally conceived. And we're asking, is the ratio of walk-ins to appointments, is it at each regional office it's different? Is it working for that office? Is the line management necessary at an office? Are our employees' processing skills up to par? Are our customer service skills up to par? So I want you to know that we're really, really working on making it even better. But we also have, as you pointed out, Senator, time factors that we've got to work on, which is getting the Real ID messaging out. And we're going to reach out as much as we can, not only with an advertising campaign. I've worked for the last week on a kind of a letter that's going to go out to as many associations and partners as possible, asking that they'll reprint it in their communications. I mean, there are, if you think about it, you have a Kentucky Medical Association, Kentucky Dental Association, Kentucky Bar Association, as well as lots of other groups, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, groups that have weekly or monthly newsletters. We're going to work really hard on all that, but there will be people that will still not have heard the message. And I think TSA, they're not going to be able to do secondary screening probably for everybody, but they have a method in place. If someone shows up at the airport, that doesn't mean those people are going to get a pass that day. They may, but we'll work very, very hard at it. So I want to thank, on behalf of the cabinet, I know, and Secretary Gray, I want to thank the members of the legislature for working with us and getting us those complaints. And Senator Westerfield, you helped enormously in that area. But I really, no. I mean, I am very, very grateful. No, I'm very grateful for your concern and your help. I tell the transportation committees that all of the time. We could not have gotten better and even gotten to this point without the support, the assistance, and the help, and we will still keep tweaking it. So please call us anytime. I think we're starting to see 35% issuance some days, and I'm really thrilled with that. So we're getting there, and considering we were at about 1% in January of 2020, it's grown considerably. So what I look at is the issuance each day, the current issuance rates. We get the numbers every day, and I look at that to see where are we towards that 35%, and it is creeping up. We have lots of 33 and 35% days. You know, it's just we've given you averages here. So that's all. If you have any questions of me as a Real ID project manager, I'm happy to answer them, but I did want to express our thanks to you and your colleagues.
I have two questions related to Real ID. The first is just the regular personal ID that is not a driver's license, personal ID that we put in the law for voting purposes. Have those been moved to these 32 regional offices, or can they still be obtained at the clerk's office?
No, all credentialing has been removed from the circuit clerk offices, so all credentials come from our regional
I
offices.
just want to make sure on that. And then the second part of that question is, I've had this asked by constituents multiple times, and I don't expect you to have this off the top of your head, but the switch, do we have any cost on what this is? It this increase in bureaucracy, if you want to call it that, or government? What is the cost of pulling these into regional offices versus the circuit court clerk's office processing IDs? Has
Right.
that even been looked at?
It has, but it's really not an apples to oranges type of
Yeah,
thing.
because
the way
you
that
got
they split their
additional
label,
services and
buildings,
understand
exactly. So theirs was running at about $15 million a year. AOC chipping in about $5 million. So it was a losing proposition for them for the overall cost. We're probably closer to 19 when you include all the locations. So
That's
it
not
did
bad.
cost a little more, but also we're revenue generating. So just the Department of Vehicle Regulation brings in $320 million a year. So as long as it's allocated to our budget, then we can use those funds to cover the needs, which we really think we're in a good position right now. This is going to be where we kind of hold for a second to let the full load of staffing hit, the full load of regional office cost, and then evaluate it as we go. If there's more offices needed, then we'll make a plan for that. If there's less, then we'll make a plan for that as well.
And I really like the online option. I mean, that's just, moving us ahead, and I like that as well.
Well, that's some of the innovation that
Yeah.
we want to push forward, because now we know judge executives are interested in getting involved. County clerks are involved, wanting to get involved. And we tell them, if you have a laptop, you can be the one that helps that person issue that license today through those renewal processes. And that means they can be hands-on, helping constituents, and people love that.
Right. Any other questions related to Real ID from the board? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to say, I really am glad Sarah and Matt were here, because I promised Sarah that I would really, really punctuate how good a job they've done, despite difficulties, and I didn't do it as well as she did, because she reminded me, this was a startup, and it's a challenge, to build business processes, really overnight.
Right.
And I will say too that, as well as the octogenarian story I shared of a constituent, she said at the same time that the staff at the regional office that she was dealing with, the woman that she was dealing with, was just as courteous as could be, but she didn't have the documents that she needed or that were required. So while we've gotten complaints, we have also gotten a lot of people write us and communicate with us about how efficient the process was for them. So you're getting a pretty good representation that way of the experience.
So are you at the end of your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions from the committee here? Here's what we've done in the past, and to be quite honest with you, this whole interim, every group that's come before us has just given us a lot of information, and really what this was about is kind of as much learning on our part as it is reporting and seeing how we can help suggest things in the future. So the number one thing is if y'all have any reorg or anything of that nature related to legislation coming in the future, we'd like to know about that. We have given the members a chance to write questions, give questions back to staff over the next week, and then we'll submit them to you all, and then we'll get those answered back. There may be a situation to where we might have a sliver of your organization come back next month and talk a little bit more. I really don't think there's a reason for the whole staff to come, but the particular things that we might have questions about, because this is unbelievably large organization. It's hard for us to get our hands around it, and this will do us some good to go home and read up on this and try to come up with some questions. So if there are there any other questions on the committee? Senator Westfield, go ahead and ask some questions. Okay.
I feel like I'm wearing out my welcome.
No, you're fine.
All right, thank you, Chairman. That's right. Thank you.
7 years.
Chairman, I appreciate that acknowledgement. I've already made a note here to reach out to your office, Mr. Secretary, or to Kenny, and have a one-on-one one of these and go back through this entire slide deck, because there are a ton of questions I left on the table that aren't specifically related to efficiency, but that I have. I'm curious about the IT arrangement that exists within KYTC. How many systems do you have? Are you using COT for everything? Is something in-house? Do you use engineers internally? And is it operating as efficiently as you'd like? As I've said, and literally every agency's come in here and I've asked this exact same question or some form of it.
I'm gonna start it out, and I'll let you speak.
Where are there inefficiencies that you can identify for us that you need us to either legislate a fix for or to budget a fix for? You tell us, because I'm not in your shoes. So that's it.
I'm gonna let Heather speak, but I will just do a bit of a headline that Heather Stout is she's really amazing. Now y'all will think I'm just patting people on the back, but she's really amazing. Just like I'm not saying everybody in the room isn't, but because they are. But Heather's team is, anybody in the private sector would be lucky to have her and the people and she's had the opportunity to have some really talented people work for her, and they have gone on to other agencies in state government. She did not particularly like that, but it happened because she's done really such a good job, and she has helped on occasion she's helped other agencies, is what I'm trying to say, and with the really great result. Okay, Heather, now to senators. Real question.
Thank you, Senator Westerfield. I have about 110 staff for IT in transportation, and 80 of those are contract employees. And we have moved consistently towards more contract employees due to ability to find skilled resources and be able to pay a rate that's more commensurate with the private sector. We're still not quite even at that level, but we're very close in comparison. The challenges we're having currently, as we moved out of the pandemic, IT became very competitive in the market, wildly competitive. And the replacement of those resources, what we used to be able to do in a couple of weeks, is now months. And that challenges us on some of our projects.
Is that just a pay issue?
It's not necessarily. It's getting available resources. So we used to, somebody might give a notice, and we have very low turnover, but somebody might give notice, and we would immediately request resumes. We would get 8 or 10 resumes within a week, interview, and probably in 2 to 3 weeks have somebody chosen and hired. Now we're getting 2 resumes, not necessarily finding the good candidate that we want. So we're waiting, and it's churning, and we've got business analyst requests out that are still open 3 months later at this point. So encouraged our vendors to try harder and dig deeper, but it's been really challenging to backfill some of our highly skilled architects and development and analyst resources. We work with COT every day. We use all their infrastructure services, all their security services, anything that they're offering. We probably around 18 to 20 million that we annually spend with COT. Efficiencies for IT, I mean, obviously, I'm sorry.
If I can interrupt and go back to the COT, do you know what the markup is? Do you know what I know when COT contracts with other agencies, there's some sort of a bump there.
I think it depends on the service and how they calculate their rate. I know that in the past couple of years, Ruth has really driven down some of the rates in some categories, and they're increased in other categories because they're trying to realign where their money is being spent. I think some of their rates are more expensive than the private sector, storage, for instance. So we have moved some of our storage off to the cloud, and some that needs to stay on premise.
What vendor that is? Amazon?
We have AWS,
AWS.
And Google.
Okay.
All of our real-time data, intelligent transportation systems data, all of our sensors, everything that kind of comes into us real-time is all through Google Cloud.
Is that all stored domestically?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, you'd mentioned 18 to 20 and then interrupted you.
Well, you asked about efficiencies that we see. We are constantly working with our business areas. We have a resource that's kind of dedicated on the vehicle regulation side, and now we have one on our highway side that we're trying to get more involved in the day-to-day things that are occurring so that we can offer more assistance and learn about everything that's going on throughout the cabinet, because it's a real challenge with this number of people to know everything that's happening that we can help with.
No question about that. And there's a couple of cabinets that are on par with you guys in that regard that are just so monumentally large. How many different databases or software systems are you using, or applications are you using within the whole cabinet?
We have over 120 applications that we maintain and support, and over time we're either adding or transitioning to new applications.
My next question was going to be, is there a map that shows where the life cycle is for these 120 applications?
Not all of them. Some of them, we're trying to obviously get off of all of our mainframe applications, so we have timelines and life cycles laid out for those. I know your next question is probably going to be about Cavis.
It was on the list.
I figured it was. And also driver's licensing is on that pipeline, and motor carriers. So we also have 80 applications that fall into our .NET. This is getting a little technical. .NET world that have their own life cycle, and those are managed by our application development branch, and they try to keep those updated as much as possible. And then we have projects going regularly as we get too much technical debt to modernize those.
120 apps, is that the number you want? Do you need 150, or do you wish you had 72?
If I had the number of resources that I wanted, we would probably have a couple more, or at least enhancements to existing apps to help. We've got a backlog of projects in IT that would be very helpful to our business areas, but we can only manage 7 to 8 large projects at one time. And just with the resources that we have and all the maintenance and everything that we have. So some of those requested projects are not in priority right now.
And Cavis.
And Cavis.
What is the status?
Well, initially we wanted Cavis to be finished at the end of this year. It looks like it's going to be summer.
I've heard that one before.
I know. It's so complex. We have implemented quite a bit with Cavis.
In fact, we were talking about it way back when I still was on the committee.
Well, if that was 7 years ago, that's when we were really starting the project. But since that time, we've implemented the boat tiling and registration system, so it's completely off the mainframe. We've implemented disabled placards. It's completely off the mainframe. We migrated all the county clerks to a standard point of sale solution. So all of the financial receipts go only through that Cavis point of sale solution. So now what we're focused on is the remaining vehicles. The system looks great. There's a lot of little things to wrap it up in order to say, okay, we can decommission the old Avis mainframe system and turn on Cavis.
What's lacking to be able to?
There's some interfaces with National Motor Vehicle System, with
Are they just not built? Or are they being tested? Or are they?
all of the above. There's
Okay.
some that are currently being analyzed to be completed to be built. There's a lot of testing already going on. We test every 3 week. We have 3-week sprint iterations, and we do a lot of testing already. A lot of training that needs to occur with the county clerks. I mean, it's a giant effort.
Yeah. And then I guess my last question, if you can, and then I won't say I'll yield the mic for forever, Mr. Chairman, but is there anything efficiency wise you wish you had, or that you think that the legislature should be doing? Money is the easy answer to the question, and you'd be surprised that not a single one of the agencies that has preceded you has asked for anything until I've spelled out this was your opportunity to ask, because a legislator's asking. So I'm really lowering the bar here for you. But apart from
You're
money,
asking me.
what else, if anything else, is there?
Well, a big challenge that we have with legislation is mandated effective dates. And it's not because we can't necessarily meet the effective date. It's that sometimes the way that we need to implement the projects, doing pilots, or the date that, if it's effective January 2024, but really it would be better implemented on a fiscal year, or January 10th because of resourcing. And, we get kind of specified into those dates, and it makes it challenging for us to know how to best manage that project without being out of compliance. So that's a key thing for me. And then more involvement in some of the legislation that involves IT earlier, so that we can, because we do get involved, but a lot of it's already kind of done by the time we get there, and then to change the course of it sometimes, or to explain the problems that could cause with everything else going on is difficult. Welcome.
Co-Chair Mueller has a couple questions.
Heather, before you go, wait.
Hold on, running.
do you use Kentucky Interactive for anything?
We use Kentucky Interactive a lot.
You do.
Yes, they are a key partner for us.
Okay. And could you generally say you're satisfied with their performance?
Very satisfied.
Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause
They
we've had, on the
a lot
Registry of Election Finance, we've had a few issues. So.
Really. A lot of their funding comes from the Transportation Cabinet, so that may be why I have more satisfaction.
Could be.
But they're very responsive to us, and our online renewal application for driver's licensing, online renewals for vehicles, and a lot of other online services are all handled through Kentucky Interactive. And then this new House Bill 284, with all of the county clerk monetization work, we'll be working through Kentucky Interactive as well with one of their partners, Champ Titles.
Okay, with that glowing review, they owe you. So, okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions for the secretary or staff? Well, thank you so much for being here. You want to make a couple of closing remarks, Mr. Secretary? Nope.
Oh.
Okay.
I was just going to thank you all.
Okay.
You come long distances
We did.
to get here for a meeting like this, and we want to be prepared, and we want to be able to
Well, I
answer
appreciate you being
curiosity
prepared and
questions.
being here for us. And I know this costs a lot of money to have the staff here and do this, and we're appreciative. And we'll prepare some questions, I'm sure, submit them, and we'll get them back to your office for responses. So if there are not any other questions, we stand adjourned. Thank you so much.